Chapter 7. The Offence. A few months later, the realm was still seething with discontent, especially in West Idari. Oto-Mani summoned the Council of Lords and the Orders of Otoma to the inner palace, both the sisters and brothers. The crown was struggling to repay the large loan from the Council of Lords, food production was still a worry, and Aduma worker discontent was rising again. Some lords used the new authority their sovereign granted them to skirt around the Freedom Proclamation. They tried to impose slavery by another name, by demanding the Aduma work for pitiful wages. Diodi advised Oto-Mani to not worry, just work on these problems with help. Through a private antechamber, Diodi entered a royal changing room that was a relatively brief walk to the throne room. Oto-Mani swiveled to see who had entered. Of course, it was his chief steward coming to attend to the monarch's robes and crown. Oto-Mani raised an eyebrow and purred when he saw his enchantingly lovely man dressed in a red and gold satin robe, intricately beautiful in the patterns of its design. The front of Diodi's robe was undone, exposing a muscle voluptuous mocha chest. Around Diodi's neck was a gold amulet of office. To express solidarity with the new freedom of his Aduma people, Diodi had grown long, beautiful braids. Tendrils of twisted black hair spilled down his shoulders and back. He shook them like a lion's mane, more to position them for comfort than to arouse his lover. Still, the movement had a clear effect. "Good morning again," Chief Steward chirped Oto-Mani. "Your Majesty," Diodi curtly bowed with a bit of officiousness as he flashed a worried but still affectionate grin. "Is there something a matter?" Reading Diodi's face. "No, I simply want everything to go well today. But I know you know how to handle these wolves. Yes, I'll just hand them my crown before they wrestle it from my head." Oto-Mani let out a boisterous laugh. Diodi was serious. "Beloved, that's not funny. Please step lightly today. I worry about the prophecy." "Don't you worry, my beloved." He soothed Diodi, stepping closely and rubbing his shoulder and back. "The prophecy won't all become true today." While being held closely, Diodi began to adjust Oto-Mani's elaborate robes of state, starting with the collar. Desirously, Oto-Mani smiled. "You are so gorgeous." Oto-Mani rubbed his nose against Diodi's and then parted his lips to taste delicious lips and tongue. Tasting the berry mint mouth freshener of Diodi, Oto-Mani commented, "Oh, berry mint, my favorite flavor." Diodi chuckled shyly, and this affection broke through the worry on his face. Diodi beamed in appreciation while whispering, "You are such a wonderful fool." "Yes, a wonderful fool for you." Just at that instant, the royal changing room door swung open quickly, and in stepped General Uhsa-Lata in gold dress armor. He quietly sucked his teeth in shock and disgust, and then, remembering decorum, turned his back and stood at attention. "Please forgive the intrusion, Your Majesty. But I've come with a full platoon of palace guards to escort you to the throne room." Still tightly holding Diodi in his arms, unashamed of his private affections, he said, "General, that seems unnecessary. The throne room is only 200 paces away. Your Majesty, the palace remains on high alert. The realm is still uneasy, and there are those who might wish to do the monarch harm. You will recall that the former monarch, your brother." The general's last sentence trailed off. It was best he not overstate his point. Oto-Mani snapped, "Yes, General. I get your point. Step outside. I will be ready shortly." General Uhsa-Lata silently bristled. How could he, a peer and hero of the realm, be dismissed like some errant schoolboy? And be dismissed because the sovereign wants to heap more sloppy kisses upon Diodi, the man who should have been Uhsa-Lata's prize. The general stiffened his spine. "Yes, Your Majesty." He straightened his attire and snatched open the door in a huff, just below notice. Oto-Mani returned his attention to Diodi. "Well, my beloved, we must go. Duty calls." Diodi responded, "Of course, I would be a terrible chief steward if I detained you any longer." The royal herald tapped his thick staff 3 times upon the superbly polished marble floor. The thuds resounded around the throne room. The court suddenly fell silent as various nobles, ministers, scribes, priests, soldiers, and servants scurried into their respective places in anticipation of the monarch's procession. In a clear, crisp tenor, the herald exclaimed, "Peers and subjects of the realm." He waited until there was genuine silence. "All hail, His Royal Majesty Oto-Mani, 33rd of that name, Lord Sovereign of the Fire Realms of Rakana." Then, after a crescendo of trumpets and drums, the immense, opulent gold doors at the far end of the throne room swung open. Once announced, there stood the monarch with an impressive retinue of train-bearers, pages, and of course his chief steward. The rubies of the fire gold diadem blazed upon his head. Oto-Mani sauntered forward. Each step was majestic, as his satin red robes rustled like military banners. A beatific smile graced his face as he blessed his subjects with nodding acknowledgments. All in attendance either fell to one knee, bowed at the waist, or nodded their heads. They genuflected in proportion to their social standing. The First Minister Ko-Toure then announced,
"All who seek justice and truth, come before our beloved Lord Sovereign Oto-Mani, 33rd of that name, and he will hear your plea."
Before Oto-Mani sat the fire gold throne. Legions died for the preservation of this ponderous central symbol of royal authority. Above the throne blazed the royal emblem of the realm, a blazing sun within a sun. It represented the twin blessings of the Universal One and Mother Oto-Ma upon every monarch's reign, including the current one. Once Oto-Mani was in front of his throne, which required him to ascend a few golden steps, he turned, and with an imperious flourish, sat down to signal all could cease bowing. His mother, Royal Lady Oto-Kimwa, was seated to the right of the royal dais and Diodi stood to the far left of it. Again, the chief steward flaunted court etiquette because his robe was undone to reveal a chiseled torso. "First Minister, what business is there before my court today?" "Your Majesty, there are petitions from the sisters and brothers of the orders, and from the supreme commander of your legions." Oto-Mani leaned back into the soft cushions of the throne and said through a subtle sigh, "Proceed." "Your Majesty." High Priestess Kala-Sonora stepped forward. Oto-Mani nodded. "High Priestess, the Sisterhood puts no other formal petition before you today than simply to convey the fire blessings of the Great Mother in your wise decision to grant a downtrodden people their freedom." Two enormous fireballs ignited in each of her hands, startling a few bored teenage nobles standing nearby. One noble groaned clearly out of the earshot of the monarch, whispering to a compatriot,
"I see the Sisterhood is officially going on the record with support for the decision."
Oto-Mani nodded to Kala-Sonora. "My great thanks to you and the Sisterhood, High Priestess." Next, General Uhsa-Lata stepped forward and saluted sharply. "Your Majesty, General Uhsa-Lata, as Supreme Commander of your legions, I ask if I may reinforce the northwestern garrisons just as a safety precaution." "Reinforce the garrisons?" Oto-Mani's eyes darted around to see if High Lord Ko-Toure or anyone from the House of Fontepi was present in court. They were noticeably absent. "I thought there is peace now in West Idari." "Well, yes, sire. Officially there is, and the House of Fontepi has repledged its allegiance to you and the realm. But if I may be so bold as to state this in court today, I am concerned as to whether the peace will last." A confused murmur rippled around the court until Oto-Mani gave the herald a signal to demand silence by thudding his staff. "General, I will most certainly consider your requests." Oto-Mani was also confused as to why the general made such a provocative request in front of the entire court. A private war council meeting would surely have been a more appropriate, a more discreet venue. Such a request only fanned the flames of rumor and suspicion among already bickering nobles. Oto-Mani pondered to himself, what is Uhsa-Lata up to? "Thank you, my liege." The general nodded and stepped back into line. General Uhsa-Lata could not help but dart a longing glance at the handsome Diodi, gorgeous in his gold and red robes. Their eyes met for the briefest moment before Diodi swiftly turned his head, in derision, and focused his gaze back upon the monarch. In the brief intervening moments while the next petitioner was walking forward, Oto-Mani was one of the few people who intercepted Uhsa-Lata's glance at Diodi. Long had he wondered if the general desired his beloved. He had even asked Diodi about whether Uhsa-Lata ever flirted with him. The only lie that Diodi ever told Oto-Mani was, "No, my beloved. Your general prefers boys much younger than me," and then snickered. Diodi knew that if he ever confessed that Uhsa-Lata tried to molest him, that Oto-Mani would be apoplectic with jealousy. And this very well might spark an irreconcilable conflict between monarch and the brilliant general he sorely needed to guard the realm. The other person who appeared to intercept the general's gaze was Royal Lady Oto-Kimwa. Diodi, for some reason, felt a little embarrassed when she looked back at him with sorrowful eyes. How he wished he could be open about his love for her second son, for she was such a wise and loving woman. She had saved his life after the death of his mother by assigning him as a servant to her son. He truly loved the royal lady as though she was his mother, though propriety prevented him from ever expressing such feelings. Diodi felt a pang of deepening sadness, and so he cast his eyes downward and she looked away. "Your Majesty." It was the High Priest of the Brotherhood Order of Oto-Mani Pem-Jinok. He stood with a gaggle of his fellow priests. Whereas the priestesses of the Sisterhood wore diaphanous, flowing robes of various colors, but most especially red-orange, the priest of the Brotherhood wore thick and uncomfortable green and gold robes. It was amazing how two religious orders that worshipped the same deity could be so different in dress and custom. High Priest Pem-Jinok, Oto-Mani gave a tiny exhale. The High Priest was a pious and generally humorless man who constantly quoted scriptures from the protocols in a way that sounded more like an admonishment than a blessing. "Your Majesty, I appreciate matters of the safety of the state, but we were supposed to petition you next." He glared at General Uhsa-Lata going out of order. Oto-Mani huffed, "Proceed, Your Holiness." This man was as pleasant as a steaming fly-infested dung pile. "I very respectfully remind our blessed monarch that the protocols require every monarch to wed as soon as feasible. We of the priesthood would be interested to know if in the next year you may make your matrimonial intentions known." The High Priest added, "There are of course many beautiful maidens who will be present at the next feasts of the elements. Two especially beautiful young women, adorned in fire gold and russet earth-colored robes, just happened to be nearby the High Priest." Oto-Mani leaned forward. "Your Holiness, I have already secured my line by naming the unborn child of my brother as my heir. What is your complaint?" "Oh, no complaint, Your Majesty. But the protocols of the ancestors stipulates that even if you name an heir, if the child is not your direct descendant, it is still divinely prudent to marry. In your case, it is prudent to produce more than one prospective heir in the event the child of Lady Olaria is either female or a boy who does not survive birth. I see, you are changing the rules and now want me to have an heir and a spare. Forgive me, Your Majesty. I have poorly worded what I meant. We simply want to voice our concern that—" "Your Holiness!" Oto-Mani spat out his interruption, causing members of the court to jump. The doddering old priest had better watch his tongue. Diodi's eyes communicated to Oto-Mani, "Beloved, calm down. Don't let this old fool bait you like he did your brother." Oto-Mani caught a glimpse of the message in Diodi's eyes, and he exhaled and slowly sat back in his throne. "Yes, Your Holiness, I appreciate your concern." Clearly it was sarcasm. Pem-Jinok was not a man that the Universal One blessed with an overabundance of social graces, or an acumen for reading the emotions of others, which is ironic for a man whose calling was supposed to be soothing the hearts and souls of others. "Thank you, Your Majesty. We just want you, as the 33rd of your line, to have a contingency plan. For in the glorious history of the realm, every sovereign must unquestionably prove his manhood by demonstrating he has a genuine interest in procreation with a woman." Audible gasps from members of the court opened even the socially blind eyes of Pem-Jinok. He had crossed a line. Possibly he was not referring to the older brother of the monarch. Possibly he was. But it could reasonably be inferred that the High Priest was making a not-so reference to homosexuality, thus in turn referencing the state secret about his sovereign. Lingering moments passed before Pem-Jinok stammered, "My deepest apologies, Your Majesty. Of course, we are certain you are interested in procreation with a woman." The old man's apology just made matters far worse by underscoring the oafishness of his self-correction. All around the perimeter of the throne room stood stunning young women and men who were palace servants and porters, dressed in togas, loincloths, or other scant lengths of cloth as relevant to the lowliness of their stations and duties. Many of the elite of the realm, such as General Uhsa-Lata, preyed upon these women and men who had no rights or recourse against their sexual exploitation. But some of these women and men secretly cherished lovers who were of the same gender. In other parts of the room, closer to the front, there were other groups of women and men who were of noble blood, and who too privately had lovers of their same gender. But they lived in constant fear of discovery. Both groups scowled at Pem-Jinok in disdain, whispering, "Stupid pious bastard." For some reason, Oto-Mani instantly glanced around the throne room and read the sadness and hurt on the faces of these women and men. Their expressions just further stoked the red-hot anger seething in his belly. The old man trembled and bowed from the waist in remorseful supplication. "As I said, I'm very sorry, Your Majesty, very sorry." He bowed lower than befitting his station, but he needed to do something to try and shield himself from the incoming firestorm. Members of his order followed suit because they were equally terrified of the monarch's brewing wrath. Oto-Mani slowly stood and with clenched teeth pointed to the door.
"Leave my sight! Leave my court
Now!" He hurled a scream at them as they all quickly crawled towards the entrance to the room. A pall of silence and then a rumbling uneasiness followed the hasty exits of the priests. All who were in the court were visibly shaken, shocked, or contemptuously amused. The entire episode was unheard of in the history of the realm. A priest, no less than the primate of the Brotherhood, implied the monarch is a homosexual before the entire court. Oto-Mani could not show weakness. He knew what happened to monarchs who permitted themselves to appear vulnerable. His brother's assassination was just one example. He would order a very public investigation into the finances of the High Priest's office and heavily sanction them for the tiniest infraction. He very likely would even charge Pem-Jinok with publicly insulting the dignity of the sovereign, remove him from office, and sentence him to serve time in the palace dungeon. Stupid pious bastard. First General Uhsa-Lata and now Pem-Jinok expressed unwise or insolent sentiments in court that embarrassed or disturbed the monarch. Was his monarchical authority unraveling at this very moment? Oto-Mani purposely did not look at Diodi's watery eyes because they'd open Oto-Mani's own floodgates, and politically, he could not afford this. The monarch composed himself, straightened his robes, and turned to the Lord Ko-Toure. "First Minister, what other business is there before the court?" He tried to say the words as calmly as the incredible moment permitted, and as though the last incident did not just occur. Without being told, the herald banged his staff several times to hush the loud hum of excited conversations that had drowned out the question of the monarch. When this did not work, the chief steward, Diodi, could not hide his irritation, and thus shouted loudly,
"Silence, please."
Nobles not at all used to the common born, especially a half-breed hushing them, took umbrage to Diodi's call to attention. Still, the court quieted. Lord Ko-Toure appeared to be equally stunned by the serious offense the High Priest just committed against the monarch. His brow furrowed with the weight of the next item he needed to place before the monarch. Thus he asked, "Your Majesty, may I approach the throne?" This meant he wanted to whisper something to the monarch in private. Acutely aware that he could not afford another incident, Oto-Mani uneasily nodded his head. "You may." Ko-Toure held the long garment of his colorful vestments of state while walking over to the throne. Leaning in closely to Oto-Mani, he whispered, "Your Majesty, something has just come to my attention that is a matter of law from my office. But I believe it would best be handled by the Privy Council of the Council of Lords. It is of a highly delicate nature. What is this matter?" Oto-Mani scowled, and every eye in the court saw him scowling, though they could not hear what was said. "Your Majesty, it is best that only the Privy Council have knowledge of this matter." After a moment of reflection, "Very well." The monarch relented and turned to the herald. "Herald, dismiss the general court except for the Privy Council." The herald in a loud voice announced the monarch's will. With 3 thunderous knocks, a small ocean of gorgeous swishing fabrics and loud chatter streamed through the large golden doors at the end of the throne room. All wanted to exit rapidly to get their turn grinding an inevitable rumor mill. General Uhsa-Lata, who until this point maintained his usual stony demeanor, had the slightest trace of intrigue upon his face. He looked to see if his men had properly taken positions to guard both sides of the throne room door, and then he stood not far away from Lord Ko-Toure. Diodi directed his staff to set chairs to the side of the throne. The elderly lords of the Privy Council, as well as other ministers, took their seats, first bowing to the throne, as is the custom to have permission to sit in the monarch's presence.
Now, good people, please like, comment, and subscribe to catch the next thrilling episode of Red Circles of Fire.